A homeless Navy SEAL's dog uncovered a sealed room and exposed a lie powerful families hid for 80 years. A homeless Navy SEAL bought back his great-grandfather's estate. His dog found a sealed room. The mountains of North Carolina had forgotten Mason Reed long before he returned. Homeless, haunted by war, and carrying everything he owned in an aging pickup, the former Navy SEAL spent his last dollars to reclaim a crumbling family estate stained by disgrace. But on the very first night, his loyal German shepherd, Titan, began barking at a hidden wall upstairs. What waited behind it would uncover a buried secret, a forgotten hero, and a truth some people would do anything to keep buried. Comment 1 if you believe the dog knew something was hidden, or 0 if you think it was pure luck. And tell us where you're watching from. The mountains appeared slowly through the morning fog, rising like ancient giants above the winding roads of western North Carolina. Mason Reed gripped the steering wheel of his battered pickup truck and stared at the familiar ridgelines in the distance. The Blue Ridge Mountains had not changed much in the 20 years since he had left. Everything else had. The truck rattled as it climbed another curve. The paint was faded. The driver's side mirror was held together with tape. A crack stretched across the windshield, like a lightning bolt frozen in glass. In the passenger seat sat a German shepherd with alert brown eyes and a black coat touched with silver around the muzzle. Titan. The dog watched the mountains quietly. Unlike most people, Titan never asked questions. He never asked Mason why a former Navy SEAL with medals locked in a storage unit now slept in truck stops and grocery store parking lots. He never asked why Mason woke up gasping in the middle of the night. He never asked why some mornings his owner sat motionless for an hour before, finding the strength to start the engine. Titan simply stayed. And for the last 3 years, that loyalty had been enough to keep Mason alive. The truck rolled past a weathered sign. Welcome to Black Creek County. Population 3104. Mason exhaled slowly. Home, or at least it had been once. His grandfather used to bring him here during summer vacations when he was a boy. Back before the war. Back before the nightmares. Back before the divorce papers. Back before the bottle. Back before everything fell apart. Titan suddenly lifted his head, his ears pointed forward. "What is it, buddy?" Mason asked. The dog stared through the windshield. Far ahead, beyond the trees, a hill emerged from the mist. And on that hill stood a large, dark silhouette. The Reed estate. Even from a distance, it looked wounded. The farmhouse sat alone against the gray sky. Its roof sagged. Its windows were dark. The front porch leaned slightly to one side. Nature had spent decades reclaiming what people had abandoned. Mason swallowed hard. Most people saw an old house. He saw a family grave. The Reed name had been poisoned in Black Creek County for nearly 80 years. His great-grandfather, Nathan Reed, had disappeared during World War II under a cloud of disgrace. The story everyone knew was simple. Nathan had betrayed his country, stolen military property, abandoned his duties, vanished. Nobody ever found him. Nobody ever cleared his name. The shame lingered long after his disappearance. It became a stain passed from generation to generation. His grandfather carried it. His father carried it. And now Mason carried it too. The irony wasn't lost on him. Nathan Reed had been branded a failure. Now Mason was one too. The county auction was already crowded when he arrived. Pickup trucks lined the gravel lot outside the courthouse annex. Men in expensive boots stood in groups laughing and drinking coffee. Local business owners, developers, land investors, people who could buy property without checking their bank balances first. Mason parked near the back. Titan jumped down beside him. Several heads turned immediately. Not because of the dog. Because of Mason, his worn jacket, his faded jeans, his truck, his face. People recognized struggle when they saw it. A few whispered. Others openly stared. Mason ignored them. He had learned long ago that pride was a luxury. Inside the auction hall, the estate appeared near the end of the listings. Most of the prime properties sold quickly. Pastures, commercial lots, lakefront acreage. Then the auctioneer cleared his throat. Next item. The Reed Estate. 198 acres. Main residence included. Property sold as is. Several people chuckled. A man near the front raised his hand. Can we bulldoze it? Laughter spread through the room. The auctioneer smiled. That's up to the buyer. More laughter. Mason remained silent. The bidding started low. A few developers tossed numbers back and forth. Not because they wanted the house, because they wanted the land beneath it. The price climbed, then stalled. One developer shook his head. Another shrugged. The old estate had a reputation. Too remote, too damaged, too many stories. The room grew quiet. The auctioneer looked around. Any other bids? Mason raised his hand. Several people turned. The room fell silent. The auctioneer blinked. Bid accepted. One of the developers laughed openly. You serious? Another man smirked. Guess ghosts need landlords too. More laughter. Mason didn't respond. The auction continued. Within minutes, it was over. The paperwork took almost everything he had left. When the final signature dried, Mason's checking account contained less money than some people spent on dinner. But for the first time in years, he owned something. Not much. A collapsing farmhouse, a century of bad memories, nearly 200 acres nobody wanted. Still, it was his outside. The afternoon sun had begun sinking toward the mountains. Mason stood beside his truck studying the deed. His hands trembled slightly, not from excitement, from fear. Because ownership meant responsibility. Responsibility meant permanence. And permanence meant there was no easy escape. Titan nudged his hand. Mason looked down. The dog stared at him calmly, as if to say, keep moving. So they did. The drive to the estate took another 40 minutes. The road narrowed. Pavement became gravel. Gravel became dirt. Pine trees crowded both sides of the path. The forest felt endless. The world grew quieter with every mile, until finally they reached the gate, or what remained of it. Rust covered the iron frame. One side hung crooked on broken hinges. Weeds swallowed the entrance. Mason climbed out. The evening wind moved through the trees. For a moment, everything felt strangely still. Then Titan stepped through the gate, without hesitation, without fear, as if he had been here before. Mason frowned. The dog moved ahead across the overgrown driveway, toward the house, toward the hill, toward the shadows. The farmhouse looked even larger up close. 3 stories, weathered wood siding, broken shutters, a stone chimney reaching toward the darkening sky. The place felt less abandoned than forgotten, as though it had simply been waiting for someone, waiting for something. Mason climbed the porch steps. The boards groaned beneath his boots. He unlocked the front door. The old lock resisted, then clicked. The door slowly opened. Dust floated through fading shafts of sunlight. The smell of age drifted out. Old wood, old paper, old secrets. Mason took 1 step forward, then stopped. Titan refused to move. The dog stood frozen at the edge of the porch. His muscles tightened. His ears flattened. A low growl rumbled deep inside his chest. Mason had heard that growl before in Afghanistan, in situations where danger appeared before humans recognized it. Titan, the dog, didn't move. Instead, he stared past Mason, past the doorway, past the entry hall, toward the 2nd floor. The growl deepened. The fur along his neck rose. Then suddenly Titan barked. Once, twice, 3 times. Violently. Not at the door. Not at the hallway, at the darkness above, at something hidden beyond sight. Mason slowly turned his head toward the staircase. The upper floor disappeared into shadow, silent, empty, watching. A cold sensation crawled across the back of his neck. For reasons he couldn't explain, his heartbeat accelerated. The house creaked softly. The mountains outside fell silent, and Titan continued barking at the darkness upstairs, as if he had found something waiting there. Something that had been waiting for a very long time. Something that did not want to stay buried. As night settled over the Blue Ridge Mountains, Mason Reed stood in the doorway of the estate his family had abandoned generations ago, and neither he nor Titan had any idea that the first mystery was already staring back at them from behind the walls, waiting patiently for someone to finally uncover the truth. The house seemed to breathe around Mason Reed as darkness settled across the mountains. The last traces of sunlight faded beyond the ridges, leaving the old Reed estate wrapped in deep blue shadows. Wind whispered through broken shutters. Tree branches scraped against the exterior walls with a sound like distant fingernails. Titan still stood near the doorway, watching, listening, waiting. Mason glanced toward the staircase. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. Yet every instinct he had developed during years as a Navy SEAL told him the dog wasn't imagining things. Titan had saved his life more than once. When Titan reacted, Mason paid attention. "Let's take a look," he said quietly. The German Shepherd immediately moved to his side. Together they stepped inside. The wooden floor creaked beneath their weight. Dust drifted through the flashlight beam. The grand entrance hall stretched ahead like a tunnel into another century. Old family portraits hung crooked on faded wallpaper. Their eyes seemed to follow him as he walked past. Mason tried to ignore the feeling. He had seen far worse places than this. Bombed villages, collapsed compounds, abandoned buildings filled with genuine danger. This was only an old house. At least that was what he told himself. Titan climbed the staircase slowly, one step at a time. His ears remained upright, his body was tense. Halfway up, he stopped and stared down the upstairs hallway. A low growl escaped his throat. Mason followed the dog's gaze. 3 closed doors stood at the far end. Moonlight spilled through a broken window and stretched across the floorboards. Nothing else. No movement. No sound. Yet Titan refused to continue. Mason knelt beside him. "It's okay, buddy." The dog briefly looked at him, then back toward the hallway. The message was clear. Something wasn't right. The old familiar pressure began building inside Mason's chest. His breathing became shallow. His heart rate accelerated. Not because of the house, because of memory. The darkness, the silence, the uncertainty. Without warning, another hallway appeared in his mind. Not here, Afghanistan. A mud brick compound, a narrow corridor, a teammate disappearing around a corner. Then the explosion, the screams, the smoke. Mason blinked hard. The memory vanished, but the feeling remained. PTSD never asked permission. It simply arrived. Titan immediately pressed against his leg, grounding him, anchoring him to the present. Mason placed a hand on the dog's neck, focused on the warmth of his fur, the steady rhythm of his breathing. The flashback slowly released its grip. "Good boy," Mason whispered. Titan's tail moved slightly. After another minute, Mason abandoned the idea of exploring the upstairs rooms. The house could wait until morning. Tonight they needed rest. He cleared a section of the downstairs living room and unrolled an old sleeping bag. Titan settled beside him near the fireplace. Outside, the wind continued moving through the mountains. Inside, the house groaned occasionally as temperatures dropped. Mason slept lightly, as veterans often do. Every sound woke him. Every creak demanded attention. Around 3 in the morning, Titan suddenly lifted his head. A deep growl rumbled through the darkness. Mason sat upright instantly. Years of training took over. His eyes scanned the room. The front door remained closed. The windows were intact. Nothing appeared unusual. Yet Titan was staring toward the ceiling, toward the second floor again. The dog barked once, sharp warning, then silence. Several long seconds passed. Nothing happened. Eventually Titan relaxed. But Mason didn't sleep again. By dawn he sat on the front porch, drinking coffee from a battered metal cup, while fog rolled across the valley below. The mountains looked peaceful, almost beautiful. Hard to believe they carried so many secrets. Titan sat beside him watching the tree line. A truck appeared shortly after sunrise. It climbed the driveway slowly before stopping near the house. A woman stepped out carrying 2 grocery bags. She appeared to be in her late 40s. Brown hair tied back, practical boots, a worn denim jacket, the kind of face shaped by kindness rather than comfort. Mason stood cautiously. The woman smiled. "You must be Mason Reed." "I am." She extended a hand. "Eleanor Brooks." Mason shook it. "You know me? Small town." A faint smile crossed her face. "Everybody knows everybody around here." Titan approached carefully. Eleanor crouched and allowed the dog to sniff her hand. "Well, aren't you handsome?" Titan accepted the greeting immediately. Mason noticed. Titan rarely trusted strangers that quickly. "I brought supplies," Eleanor said. She lifted the grocery bags. "Figured you might need them." Mason glanced inside. Bread, canned soup, coffee, dog food. The gesture caught him off guard. People hadn't been kind to him in a long time. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." She looked toward the house. "My grandfather used to talk about this place." Mason followed her gaze. "The Reed estate?" She nodded. "He always said the house remembered things." Mason laughed softly. "That's an interesting way to describe a building." He wasn't joking. The smile disappeared from her face. "There are stories about this house." Mason immediately noticed the shift in her tone. "What kind of stories?" Eleanor hesitated. The wind moved through the trees. Finally she spoke. "People hear things." "What things?" "Footsteps." She looked toward the second floor. "Voices sometimes." Mason didn't respond. Eleanor seemed embarrassed. "I know how that sounds." "I've heard stranger." That answer was true. "Far stranger." Eleanor nodded. "Most people around here avoid the estate. Because of Nathan Reed." The question hung in the air. She looked surprised. "You know about that?" "Everyone seems to." Eleanor sighed. "The town never let it go." Mason stared toward the mountains. "Neither did my family." For a moment neither spoke. Then Titan suddenly stood, alert, focused. He raced into the house. Eleanor frowned. "What's he doing?" Mason followed immediately. Titan ran upstairs, straight to the hallway, straight to the same section where he had stopped the night before. The dog began scratching aggressively at the wall beside a massive antique bookcase. Wood splintered beneath his paws. Dust filled the air. Mason reached him seconds later. "What is it?" Titan barked repeatedly. His nose pressed against the wall. Then he scratched again and again and again. Eleanor arrived behind Mason. The flashlight beam swept across the surface. At first Mason saw nothing. Then he noticed it. Tiny marks hidden beneath peeling wallpaper. Small circular holes, rows of them, perfectly aligned. "Nails," he said quietly. Eleanor stepped closer. Her eyes widened. Those weren't original. Someone had covered something. A chill moved through Mason. Titan continued scratching. His behavior was different now, more focused, more determined. Not curiosity. Purpose. Mason grabbed a loose section of wallpaper, carefully peeled it back. A cloud of dust exploded into the air. Beneath it appeared old wood, different from the surrounding wall. Newer, stronger, deliberately installed. Titan barked again, then placed his paw directly against one small section. Mason examined the spot. There, almost invisible, a tiny metal shape hidden beneath decades of paint. A latch, or perhaps a lock. His pulse quickened. Eleanor stared. What in the world? Outside, thunder rumbled across the mountains. Storm clouds gathered over the valley. The room darkened. Titan stood motionless before the hidden section of wall, waiting, as if he had finally found what he had been searching for since the moment they arrived. And deep inside the old Reed estate, behind layers of wood, wallpaper, and forgotten years, something hidden was beginning to reveal itself. Something that had remained untouched for more than 80 years. Something that was never supposed to be found. Especially not by a dog. And certainly not by the last Reed to come home. The thunderstorm arrived faster than anyone expected. Rain hammered the roof of the Reed estate with relentless force, turning the windows into sheets of moving silver. Lightning flashed beyond the mountains, illuminating the old farmhouse in brief bursts of ghostly white. Upstairs, Titan refused to leave the hidden section of wall. The German shepherd stood rigid, focused, determined. His nose remained pressed against the wood as if he could smell something buried beneath decades of silence. Mason knelt beside him. The hidden latch was cold beneath his fingertips, old, metal carefully concealed. Eleanor stood behind them, holding a flashlight. "You think it opens?" she asked quietly. Mason studied the wall. "Only one way to find out." The latch resisted at first. Years of dust and neglect had frozen the mechanism in place. Mason applied more pressure. A sharp, metallic click echoed through the hallway. All three froze. Even the storm outside seemed to pause. Then a deep sound rolled through the wall. Wood shifted. Ancient hinges groaned, slowly. Almost reluctantly, part of the wall moved inward. A hidden door. Eleanor's eyes widened. Oh my God. The opening revealed darkness. Not an empty cavity, not a storage space. An actual room. A secret room, hidden behind the wall, completely sealed. Mason felt a chill move through him. The air that escaped smelled old, not rotten, preserved. Like opening a forgotten trunk buried in an attic for generations. Titan stepped forward immediately. His tail remained low, his posture alert. But there was no fear in him now, only purpose. Mason switched on his flashlight. The beam pierced the darkness. And for several seconds, neither he nor Eleanor spoke, because what they saw made no sense. The room looked untouched, perfectly untouched. While the rest of the house had surrendered to time, this room had somehow survived. Dust covered everything, yet nothing appeared damaged. Nothing appeared disturbed. A heavy oak desk stood against one wall. Bookshelves lined another. Maps hung neatly in wooden frames. A leather chair sat behind the desk as though someone had only stepped away for lunch. The room felt frozen, preserved in another era. "How is this possible?" Eleanor whispered. Mason didn't answer, because he was asking himself the same question. The flashlight moved slowly across the space. Military maps, documents, photographs, several filing cabinets. A steel footlocker positioned beneath the window. His pulse quickened. Nathan Reed. This had to belong to Nathan Reed, the disgraced ancestor whose shadow still haunted the family. Titan entered first. Carefully, methodically. The dog moved around the room, sniffing every corner. Mason followed. The desk immediately drew his attention. Its surface remained remarkably clean beneath the dust. An old lamp stood beside stacks of papers. A fountain pen rested atop a leather-bound journal. Everything was positioned with deliberate care, like someone expected to return. Eleanor picked up a framed photograph. The image showed a young soldier standing beside another German shepherd. The picture was faded but recognizable. The dog wore military gear. The man looked proud, confident, determined. Mason took the frame. The soldier's face resembled the portraits downstairs. Nathan Reed, there was no doubt, his great-grandfather. "You've never seen a picture of him?" Eleanor asked. Mason shook his head. "My father burned most of the family photographs." She looked surprised. "Why?" "Because he hated what Nathan did." The words felt heavy. Nathan Reed, the traitor, the coward, the disgrace. That was the version Mason had grown up hearing. Yet standing inside this room, the story suddenly felt incomplete. Very incomplete. Titan suddenly barked. Once. Sharp, focused, Mason turned. The dog stood near the center of the room, pawing at the floorboards, scratching, digging. What's he got now? Titan barked again, then scratched harder. The old wood creaked beneath him. Mason approached. Several boards appeared slightly uneven, different from the others. He grabbed a nearby screwdriver from the desk drawer, carefully worked the edge of one plank. The board lifted. Dust exploded upward. Beneath it sat a narrow cavity hidden beneath the floor. Inside rested a single object. Metal. Small, rectangular. Mason reached inside, pulled it free. A military dog tag. The room fell silent. Rain continued pounding the roof. But inside the secret chamber, time seemed to stop. Mason turned the tag over. The flashlight beam illuminated the worn letters. The name engraved on the metal wasn't Nathan Reed. It wasn't anyone named Reed. Instead it read, Lieutenant Walter Hayes, U.S. Army. Eleanor frowned. Who's Walter Hayes? Mason stared at the tag. The name felt familiar, very familiar. Then he remembered. Several years earlier, while sleeping in a public library during one particularly rough winter, he had spent days reading military history. The name Walter Hayes had appeared in an article about World War II, a missing officer, officially declared lost overseas. His body never recovered. His disappearance remained unsolved. Mason looked up. This doesn't make sense. What doesn't? He wasn't supposed to be here. Eleanor frowned. What do you mean? Mason held up the tag. This officer disappeared in Europe. Lightning flashed outside. The room brightened briefly. Then darkness returned. Neither spoke. The implication settled heavily between them. If Walter Hayes had vanished overseas, why was his dog tag hidden beneath the floor of a secret room in North Carolina? Titan stared at Mason, waiting, almost expectantly, as if the dog already understood that this small piece of metal changed everything. Mason carefully placed the tag on the desk, then turned his attention toward the steel footlocker. Military issue, heavy, locked. A brass padlock secured the lid. Eleanor stepped closer. You think there's more? There always is. The answer came automatically. Years of investigations had taught him that clues rarely existed alone. Every answer created another question. The footlocker contained questions. Lots of them. Unfortunately, it was locked. Mason searched the desk drawers. Most contained stationery, old receipts, maps, nothing useful. Then he found a ring of keys, 6 keys, different shapes, different sizes. His heartbeat accelerated. He returned to the footlocker, tried the first key. Nothing. Second key. Nothing. Third, still nothing. The fourth key slid smoothly into the lock. Both Mason and Eleanor held their breath. A soft click echoed inside the room. The lock opened. Neither moved immediately. The moment felt strangely important, as if they stood on the edge of something much larger than themselves. Finally, Mason lifted the lid. The hinges groaned softly. Inside sat stacks of neatly organized folders, military records, maps, photographs, and several leather-bound journals. Dozens of them. The first journal rested on top. Its cover was worn from use. A name had been stamped into the leather. Nathan Reed. Mason stared at it. The room seemed smaller suddenly. The storm louder, the air heavier. For his entire life, Nathan Reed had been a ghost, a family curse, a warning. Now the man sat on the other side of a notebook, waiting to tell his story, waiting to defend himself or condemn himself. Mason slowly opened the cover. The first page contained a handwritten entry. The ink remained remarkably clear. Nathan's handwriting was strong and precise. The date at the top read, October 12, 1944. Below it appeared a single sentence, a sentence that made Mason's breath catch in his throat. If anyone ever finds this room, know this first. I was never the man they said I was. Silence filled the room. The storm continued raging beyond the walls, but Mason barely heard it, because in that moment, standing inside a hidden room no one knew existed, holding the words of a man history had already judged, the first crack appeared in a lie that had survived for nearly 80 years. And somewhere deep inside the Reed estate, buried beneath decades of shame and silence, the truth had finally begun fighting its way back into the light. The storm lingered through most of the night. Rain drummed against the roof, while wind pushed through the old trees surrounding the estate. Lightning flashed occasionally beyond the mountains, illuminating the hidden room in brief silver bursts. Mason sat at Nathan Reed's desk. The leather journal lay open before him. Titan rested beside his chair. Eleanor sat across from him, wrapped in an old blanket she had found downstairs. Neither spoke. The words written by Nathan Reed demanded silence. Mason took a slow breath and began reading. October 12, 1944. If anyone ever finds this room, know this first. I was never the man they said I was. The next pages revealed a man completely different from the family legend. Nathan's writing was calm, precise. disciplined. The handwriting belonged to a soldier, not a criminal, not a coward, not a traitor. Mason turned another page. I have spent months gathering evidence against men who wear American uniforms but profit from American suffering. Medical supplies intended for wounded soldiers are disappearing. Morphine, penicillin, surgical equipment. Entire shipments vanish before reaching field hospitals. The official reports blame enemy attacks. The truth is far worse. Someone within our own ranks is stealing them. Eleanor slowly lowered her hand from her mouth. My God. Mason continued reading. The words grew more personal, more dangerous. Nathan described discovering a network that diverted supplies and sold them through black market channels during the war. Wounded soldiers died waiting for medicine that had already been stolen. Men survived battles only to perish from infections that should have been treatable. Nathan had begun collecting names, documents, witness statements, evidence, enough evidence to destroy powerful people. The journal mentioned one man repeatedly, Lieutenant Walter Hayes, the same name engraved on the dog tag Titan had found beneath the floor. Walter Hayes was not part of the corruption. He was helping expose it. The deeper Mason read, the more impossible the old family story became. Nothing about these pages suggested betrayal. Nathan sounded like a man risking everything to stop one. Outside, dawn slowly arrived. Gray light filtered through the windows of the hidden room. The storm finally moved east. The mountains emerged from the fog, one ridge at a time. Titan lifted his head. He watched Mason carefully, almost as if he understood the significance of every page. Mason rubbed the dog's neck absent-mindedly. The familiar warmth grounded him, the same way Titan always did, because reading Nathan's words was stirring something uncomfortable inside him. Recognition, the same helpless frustration, the same feeling of fighting a battle nobody else could see. Mason knew that feeling. Veterans often did. After leaving the military, people expected him to simply move on, find a job, smile, be normal again. Few understood how difficult that could be. Even fewer wanted to hear about it. Nathan's words carried the same loneliness, the loneliness of knowing something important while everyone around you believed a lie. Hours passed. Journal after journal revealed pieces of a larger story. Maps, shipment records, photographs, names, dates. Every discovery chipped away at the image Mason had carried his entire life. By late afternoon, Eleanor finally spoke. Your father never saw any of this? Mason shook his head. No. Your grandfather? No. He stared at the journals. If they had, everything would have been different. The realization hurt more than he expected. His grandfather had died, believing Nathan abandoned the family. His father had spent an entire lifetime carrying resentment toward a man he never truly knew. Generations damaged by a lie. Titan suddenly stood. He walked across the room and sat beside a bookshelf. Mason looked up. What is it? The dog stared at him, then at the shelf, then back at him. Eleanor smiled faintly. He's doing it again. What? Acting like he knows something. Mason stood and joined Titan. Several books lined the shelf. Military history, navigation manuals, maps. One item caught his attention immediately. A framed photograph. Nathan Reed stood beside a German shepherd. The same image they had found earlier. But now Mason looked closer. The dog wore military markings. Its posture mirrored Titan's almost perfectly. Confident, focused, loyal. A handwritten note had been tucked into the frame. Mason carefully unfolded it. The paper was brittle with age. The handwriting belonged to Nathan. His name was Valor. He saved my life twice before his second birthday. If loyalty has a face, it looks like a dog waiting for his handler to come home. Mason stared at the words. Something tightened in his chest. Titan walked over and rested his head against Mason's leg. For a moment, neither moved. The room seemed smaller, quieter. Nathan Reed, Valor, Mason Reed, Titan. Separated by generations, connected by something difficult to explain. Eleanor watched silently. She recognized the look on Mason's face. Not sadness, not exactly recognition. The kind that comes when someone unexpectedly finds a piece of themselves in another person's story. That evening, Eleanor finally prepared to leave. The roads would be muddy after the storm. Night would arrive soon. Before stepping outside, she paused near the doorway. "You're not what people expected." Mason looked up. "What does that mean?" "The town." She smiled slightly. "They expected some angry outsider looking for money. And instead they got a man trying to understand his family." Mason didn't know how to respond. Eleanor hesitated, then added quietly, "Be careful." His expression changed. "Why?" "Because if Nathan really uncovered something this serious..." She looked around the room. "Someone probably worked very hard to keep it hidden." The words lingered after she left. Mason watched her truck disappear down the mountain road. Then darkness returned. The estate became quiet once more. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that often triggered his PTSD. Night had always been the hardest. Darkness removed distractions, left him alone with memory. Hours later, he sat on the front porch, staring into the valley. Titan rested beside him. The mountains stretched endlessly beneath moonlight. Beautiful, silent, ancient. Yet Mason barely noticed them. His thoughts remained trapped inside the journals. Nathan Reed had spent years fighting to expose corruption. Mason had spent years fighting battles inside his own head. Different wars, different enemies. But strangely familiar, the old pressure returned. His breathing shortened, his pulse accelerated. Without warning, another flashback surfaced. Dust, smoke, gunfire. The sound of someone screaming his name. Mason squeezed his eyes shut. Not now, not here. But trauma never followed rules. The memory grew stronger, until a familiar weight pressed against his chest. Titan. The German shepherd had climbed onto the porch bench beside him. One paw rested against Mason's arm. The dog stared directly into his eyes. Present, steady, real. Mason focused on him, focused on his breathing, focused on the mountain air. Slowly, the flashback faded. The present returned, the porch, the valley, the dog, home. For the first time in years, Mason felt something unexpected. Not happiness, not peace, something smaller, a beginning. Because Nathan Reed was no longer just a family ghost. He was becoming a man, a real man, a soldier, a protector, perhaps even a hero. And if the journals were telling the truth, someone had stolen that truth from him. Someone had buried it, hidden it, protected the lie. Mason looked toward the dark silhouette of the house. The hidden room waited upstairs, filled with unanswered questions, filled with names, filled with secrets. Titan suddenly lifted his head. His ears pointed toward the driveway. The dog stood instantly, alert, focused. Mason followed his gaze. Far beyond the trees, near the entrance gate, headlights appeared. A black SUV. Its engine idled for several seconds. Then the vehicle slowly turned around and disappeared back down the road. Mason remained motionless. The estate was isolated, remote. No reason existed for strangers to visit after dark. Yet someone had, and they had stayed just long enough to make sure he noticed. Titan growled softly, deep, protective. The feeling that settled over Mason had nothing to do with fear. It was recognition. The kind that comes when a mystery stops being history and starts becoming personal. Someone knew he was here. Someone knew about the estate, and perhaps someone knew exactly what had been hidden inside the walls. The journals had revealed one truth. Nathan Reed was not the man history claimed. But as Mason watched the darkness beyond the gate, another realization began taking shape. The people who buried the truth might not be buried themselves. And if that was true, uncovering Nathan's story was about to become far more dangerous than either he or Titan had imagined. The next morning arrived beneath a sky of pale gray clouds. Fog drifted through the valleys below the estate, wrapping the mountains in layers of white that moved like slow rivers through the trees. Mason hadn't slept much. The black SUV remained in his thoughts. So did the journals. So did the realization that someone had been watching the property. Titan seemed restless too. The German shepherd paced the porch while Mason drank coffee and studied the road leading to the gate. Every few minutes the dog stopped and stared into the woods, listening, watching, waiting. The estate no longer felt abandoned. It felt observed. By mid-morning, Mason returned to the hidden room. Sunlight filtered through the dusty window, illuminating floating particles that drifted lazily through the air. Titan followed him upstairs. The dog immediately settled beside Nathan's desk, almost as if he had claimed the room as his own. Mason opened another journal. This one contained names, dozens of names, military personnel, supply officers, transportation coordinators. Most meant nothing to him, but several names appeared repeatedly. Nathan had circled them, marked them, tracked their movements. One name stood above all the others, Charles Hale. Mason frowned. The name sounded familiar, very familiar. He flipped through more pages. The Hale name appeared again, and again, and again. Each mention connected to missing supplies, missing records, missing witnesses. The deeper Mason read, the more uncomfortable he became. Because Hale wasn't just another suspect. Nathan clearly believed Hale was running the operation. The man sat at the center of everything. Titan suddenly stood, his ears perked. A vehicle approached outside. Mason looked through the window. A black SUV climbed the driveway. The same one. His pulse quickened. The vehicle stopped near the porch. Moments later, a second vehicle arrived, then a third. One expensive pickup truck. One luxury sedan. Not visitors. A delegation. Mason walked downstairs. Titan stayed close. The front door opened before anyone could knock. 3 people stood on the porch. The first was a tall man in his 60s wearing an expensive coat and polished boots, silver hair, confident posture, the kind of man accustomed to being obeyed. The second was a younger woman carrying a leather briefcase, attorney. No question about it. The third was a uniformed sheriff, older, weathered, calm eyes. The silver-haired man smiled, but it never reached his eyes. Mr. Reed. Mason said nothing. The man extended a hand. Victor Hale. There it was, the name, like a ghost stepping out of Nathan's journals. Mason shook his hand carefully. The grip was firm, controlled, evaluating. Victor glanced past him toward the house. Quite a property. It's mine. Victor's smile widened slightly. Yes, technically. The attorney shifted uncomfortably. The sheriff remained silent. Titan stepped forward. A low growl emerged from deep inside his chest. Victor looked down. The smile disappeared immediately. Dogs often noticed things people missed. Titan clearly didn't like him. Victor looked back at Mason. I'll get straight to the point. Good. The Reed estate sits in the middle of several development opportunities. Mason folded his arms. Victor continued. My company owns land on 3 sides of this property. So I'd like to buy it. Mason laughed softly. No. The answer came instantly. Victor seemed unsurprised. I haven't named a price? I don't care. The attorney finally spoke. Mr. Reed, this could be very beneficial for you. Mason looked at her. I'm not selling. Silence followed. The mountains seemed to hold their breath. Victor studied him for several seconds, then nodded. I was hoping you'd be reasonable. I am. Victor's expression hardened. No. Reasonable would be taking the opportunity being offered. Titan growled again, louder this time. The sheriff finally stepped forward. Easy, boy. Titan ignored him. His eyes never left Victor. The sheriff sighed. My name's Sheriff Tom Mercer. Mason nodded. Mr. Reed, mind if I give you some advice? Depends. Mercer looked toward the mountains, then back at the house. People around here have long memories, so I've noticed. The Reed family history. He hesitated. It still stirs emotions. Victor smiled faintly. Some stories are better left alone. The statement hung in the air. Not a threat. Not quite, but close enough. Mason met Victor's gaze. Funny thing about stories. Victor waited. The truth usually survives them. For the first time, genuine irritation flashed across Victor's face. Only for a moment. Then it vanished. The polished smile returned. Well, he adjusted his coat. If you change your mind about selling, call me. The attorney handed over a business card. Victor turned toward the SUV, then stopped. One final glance at the house, one final glance at Mason. You know, he said quietly, some places carry old wounds. Mason didn't respond. Victor nodded toward the estate. Sometimes reopening them causes more damage than leaving them alone. Then he climbed into the vehicle. Minutes later, all three vehicles disappeared down the mountain road. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. Titan remained on the porch, watching. Long after the vehicles vanished. That evening, Eleanor arrived carrying food and supplies. She immediately noticed Mason's mood. What happened? He told her. Every detail. Victor Hale, the attorney, the sheriff, the offer, the warning. Eleanor's expression darkened. That's not good. You know him? Everybody knows him. She set the supplies on the kitchen table. The Hale family practically owns half the county. Mason remembered Nathan's journals. Charles Hale, Victor Hale, the same family, the same bloodline. A coincidence felt increasingly unlikely. Eleanor noticed his expression. What? Mason explained what he had found in Nathan's records. Her face paled. You're serious? He nodded. Victor's grandfather? Maybe great-grandfather. Neither liked the implication. The room fell quiet. Outside, dusk settled across the mountains. The forest slowly disappeared into darkness. Titan sat near the window, watching. Always watching. Around midnight, Mason woke abruptly. Not from a nightmare. From Titan. The dog was barking. Violently. Mason grabbed a flashlight and rushed outside. The night air felt cold. Sharp. Titan sprinted toward the driveway. Mason followed, then stopped. His truck, the front tires had been slashed, both of them, completely destroyed. Mason crouched beside the vehicle. The cuts were clean, deliberate, not random vandalism. A message. Titan growled toward the woods, then suddenly charged. The dog disappeared between the trees. Titan, Mason ran after him. Branches whipped against his face. Leaves crunched beneath his boots. The flashlight beam bounced wildly through the darkness. Ahead, Titan barked furiously. Then came another sound. Footsteps. Someone running. Fast. Mason pushed harder. Years of military conditioning still remained beneath the scars and exhaustion. The barking moved deeper into the woods, then suddenly stopped. The silence that followed felt wrong. Very wrong. Titan. No response. Fear tightened inside Mason's chest. He moved faster, searching, listening, praying. Then the flashlight found him. Titan emerged from the darkness, limping. His breathing was heavy. A shallow cut marked his shoulder. Fresh blood darkened his fur. Mason dropped to one knee immediately. Titan. The dog pushed against him, still alert, still trying to continue the chase. Mason carefully examined the wound. Not deep, thank God. But someone had hurt him. Someone had been close enough to strike him. Anger surged through Mason. Hot, immediate. Not because of the truck. Not because of the threats. Because somebody had hurt Titan. The dog had stood beside him when nobody else did. The dog had pulled him through nights that nearly broke him. And now someone had tried to stop him. Titan leaned against his chest. The German shepherd's heartbeat pounded beneath his hand. Alive. Safe for now. Mason looked into the darkness beyond the trees. Whoever had entered the property was gone. But the message remained. The threats were no longer subtle. The warnings were no longer hidden. Someone wanted the truth buried. Someone wanted him gone. And for the first time since arriving at the estate, Mason realized this wasn't simply a mystery about the past. It was a battle happening right now. A battle that had just drawn blood. And somewhere, beyond the mountains, people connected to the Hale name were beginning to understand something dangerous. Nathan Reed had hidden the truth, but his great-grandson was finding it, and Titan was leading him straight toward it. The wound on Titan's shoulder was shallow. That fact alone allowed Mason to breathe again. By sunrise, the German shepherd was already walking around the property. as if nothing had happened. The veterinarian in town had cleaned the cut and assured Mason that the injury would heal quickly. Still, Mason couldn't shake the anger. Every time he looked at the bandage beneath Titan's fur, the memory returned. The slashed tires, the shadow in the woods, the chase through darkness. Someone had crossed a line, and the message had been clear. Stop digging. Mason stood beside the barn as morning sunlight spilled across the valley. The old structure leaned slightly to one side, its weathered boards silver from decades of mountain winters. Behind it stretched hundreds of acres of abandoned pasture. Golden grass moved beneath the wind. Beyond that, the Blue Ridge Mountains rose toward the horizon like ancient guardians. Titan trotted across the field. His tail moved slowly. His shoulder appeared stiff, but his eyes remained bright, determined. The same determination Mason had seen in combat dogs overseas. The same refusal to quit. You should be resting. Titan ignored him. The dog continued toward the barn, then suddenly stopped. His ears lifted. His head tilted. Mason immediately recognized the behavior. Titan had found something again. The German shepherd disappeared through the barn doorway. Mason followed. The interior smelled of old wood and dust. Sunlight streamed through gaps in the walls. Broken farm equipment sat abandoned in corners. Rust covered everything. The place looked untouched for decades. Titan moved deeper inside, toward the rear wall. Then he began scratching. Not aggressively, not urgently, methodically. The same behavior he had shown near the hidden room. Mason frowned. What is it now? Titan barked once, then scratched again. The floor beneath him produced a hollow sound. Mason froze. The sound was different, distinctly different. He knelt, knocked against the wooden boards. Most felt solid. One section did not. The hollow echo returned. His pulse quickened. Not again. Surely not another hidden compartment. Yet, experience had already taught him never to underestimate old secrets. Mason fetched a pry bar from the truck, carefully worked the edge of the boards. The wood resisted, then suddenly lifted. Dust exploded upward. A narrow cavity appeared beneath the floor. Titan immediately lowered his nose into the opening, sniffing, investigating. Mason reached inside. His fingers touched metal, cold, smooth, small. He slowly pulled the object free, a brass military compass, old, heavy, beautifully crafted. The glass remained intact despite decades underground. Engraved across the back were two initials, N.R. Nathan Reed. Mason stared at it. The compass felt surprisingly heavy in his palm, as if it carried more than metal, as if it carried purpose. Titan continued sniffing the compartment. The dog barked again. Mason looked inside. There was something else. A folded piece of oilcloth tucked beneath the wooden support beams. Carefully protected, carefully hidden, he removed it slowly. The material crackled as it unfolded. Inside was a map, hand-drawn. A narrow mountain valley had been marked in red ink. Several landmarks surrounded it. Streams, ridges, old logging roads. And in the center appeared a handwritten label. The silent basin Mason studied the faded markings. The name meant nothing to him, yet something about it felt important, very important. Titan sat beside him, watching, waiting, almost proud. The dog had uncovered another piece, another clue, another step forward. By afternoon, Mason drove into town to show Eleanor. She met him outside the small schoolhouse where she taught history. Children were leaving for the day. Their laughter echoed across the parking lot, a reminder that life continued despite secrets buried beneath mountains. Eleanor studied the map carefully. Her expression changed immediately. Where did you find this? Hidden under the barn. She looked up. The silent basin. You've heard of it? Eleanor nodded slowly. My grandfather talked about it. Mason waited. She seemed uncomfortable, as though discussing something half-forgotten. Most people don't go there. Why? Eleanor looked toward the mountains, because strange stories surround it. Mason smiled slightly. Everything around here seems to come with strange stories. This one's different. The smile vanished from her face. When I was young, older people would stop talking whenever the basin came up. Mason frowned. What kind of stories? Eleanor folded the map up carefully. People disappeared there. The answer hung in the air. Not supernatural, not ghost stories. Something worse. Real uncertainty. Real fear. Mason crossed his arms. Disappeared. Mostly hunters, loggers, travelers. She shrugged. Probably accidents. But nobody ever seemed sure. The mountains beyond town appeared darker somehow. More distant. More mysterious. Eleanor pointed toward the map. This road doesn't exist anymore. Her finger traced a faded line. Neither does this bridge. She continued studying it. But the valley itself is real. Mason felt the familiar pull of curiosity. The same pull that had led him into the hidden room. The same pull that kept opening doors others wanted closed. Nathan had hidden the map for a reason. The question was why. That evening he returned to the estate. The sun dipped behind the ridges. Long shadows stretched across the fields. Titan walked beside him. His limp had almost disappeared. The dog seemed stronger, more energetic, as if finding clues gave him purpose. Mason sat on the porch steps. The compass rested in his hands. The brass surface reflected the fading light. For several minutes he simply turned it over, studying it, thinking. Then something caught his eye. The back plate appeared slightly uneven, almost as if it had been modified. Mason examined it closely. A tiny seam circled the outer edge. His pulse quickened, another secret. Using a pocket knife, he carefully worked the seam. The metal shifted. A hidden compartment opened inside the compass. Mason stared. Folded within was another piece of paper, smaller, older, more fragile. He unfolded it carefully. The handwriting matched Nathan's journals. If you find this, trust the dog. He found the first clue. He will find the next. Mason froze. The mountains fell silent around him. Even the wind seemed to pause. Trust the dog. Nathan had written those words nearly 80 years ago, long before Titan existed, long before Mason was born. Yet somehow the message felt personal, almost impossible. Titan rested beside the porch, watching him calmly, watching as if nothing unusual had happened. Mason laughed softly. You know something I don't you? Titan tilted his head. The response only made Mason laugh harder. For the first time in months, maybe years, a genuine laugh, the kind that reached his eyes, the kind PD often stole. Night arrived slowly. Stars appeared above the mountains. The estate stood quiet beneath moonlight. Yet Mason's thoughts raced. The silent basin, the hidden map, the compass, Nathan's message. All of it pointed in one direction. The mountains, the valley, the next piece of the truth. Near midnight, Mason sat inside the hidden room reviewing the journals once more. One passage finally caught his attention. A brief entry written several months after Walter Hayes disappeared. The basin remains untouched. The evidence stays safe there. If I fail, Valor knows the way. Mason stared at the page. Valor, Nathan's German shepherd, the dog from the photographs, the dog mentioned in the notes, the dog Nathan trusted. The implications hit him immediately. Nathan had hidden something in the basin, something important enough to mention repeatedly. Something connected to Walter Hayes, something connected to the conspiracy. Titan lifted his head from the floor. The German shepherd stared toward the dark window. Listening, Mason followed his gaze. The mountains stood beneath moonlight, silent, waiting. The same mountains Nathan once crossed, the same wilderness Valor once traveled. Somewhere beyond those ridges lay the silent basin. And buried within it, perhaps for generations, waited another piece of a story, powerful enough to frighten wealthy families even today. Mason closed the journal. Decision settled inside him. Tomorrow he would follow the map. Tomorrow he would go where Nathan had gone. Tomorrow he would enter the valley. People spent decades avoiding. And for reasons he couldn't fully explain, he already knew one thing with absolute certainty. Titan would lead the way. Morning arrived beneath a sky washed clean by the previous night's rain. The Blue Ridge Mountains stretched across the horizon in layers of blue and silver, their peaks disappearing into drifting clouds. Sunlight spilled over the ridges and painted the valleys with gold. Mason stood beside his truck, studying Nathan's map. The silent basin waited somewhere beyond those mountains, hidden, forgotten, protected by distance and time. Titan sat beside him. The German shepherd's wound had almost completely healed. The bandage was gone. Only a thin scar remained beneath his fur. Mason loaded supplies into a backpack: water, food, flashlights, first aid equipment. The journals remained locked inside the hidden room. He wasn't taking any chances. If something happened in the mountains, Nathan's evidence would remain safe. Eleanor arrived shortly before sunrise. She stepped from her truck carrying a folded topographical map. "You really decided to do it." Mason smiled faintly. "You sound surprised. I was hoping you'd wait a few days." Titan walked over and greeted her. Eleanor scratched behind his ears. Apparently nobody told him to wait. Mason laughed softly. Titan's tail moved. Eleanor unfolded the map across the hood of the truck. The old logging road should still exist for about 6 miles. She pointed toward a winding route through the mountains. "After that, you're on foot." Mason studied the terrain. The basin sat deep within a maze of ridges and valleys, remote enough to discourage casual visitors, perfect for hiding something or someone. "You don't have to come." Eleanor looked up. "I know." She folded the map. "But somebody should probably make sure you don't get lost." By mid-morning they entered the mountains. The old logging road twisted through dense forests of pine and oak. Sunlight filtered through the branches overhead. The deeper they traveled, the quieter the world became. Civilization faded behind them. Cell service disappeared. Road signs vanished. Even the sounds of distant traffic disappeared. Only the wilderness remained. Titan rode in the back seat until the road finally ended. Then he jumped out immediately. Eager, focused, ready. The abandoned road ahead was little more than a trail now. Grass grew between the tire tracks. Young trees had begun reclaiming the route, nature slowly erasing human presence. Mason adjusted his backpack. The mountain air felt cool and clean, the kind of air that reminded him why he had always preferred wilderness to cities. Cities felt crowded, noisy, unpredictable. The mountains asked only one thing: respect. The hike began easily. The trail followed a creek through a narrow valley. Water rushed over smooth stones. Birds called from the trees. For several hours, the journey felt almost peaceful. Then the terrain changed. The trail narrowed. The forest thickened. Steep ridges rose on both sides. Sunlight became scarce. The world grew darker beneath the canopy. Titan moved ahead. His nose constantly tested the air. Occasionally he stopped, listened, then continued. Always certain, always purposeful, as if some invisible thread pulled him forward. Around noon they reached a clearing overlooking a valley. Mason stopped. The view stole his breath. Miles of untouched wilderness stretched before them. Rolling forests, fog-covered ridges, rocky cliffs, no roads, no buildings, no signs of modern life. Only mountains, ancient and silent. "The basin," Eleanor whispered. The valley below felt different, not frightening, not haunted, simply isolated, cut off from the world. A place where secrets could sleep undisturbed. Titan suddenly barked, once, then twice. The dog raced downhill. Mason immediately followed. They descended through thick undergrowth. Branches scraped against their clothes. Loose rocks shifted beneath their boots. The slope grew steeper, more difficult. Several times Mason nearly lost his footing. Titan never hesitated. The German shepherd moved with absolute confidence, as though he knew exactly where he was going. An hour later, they reached the valley floor. Fog drifted between the trees. The air felt cooler here, still almost sacred. Titan slowed. His pace changed, more careful now, more deliberate. The dog lowered his nose, following something. A scent, a trail. Mason exchanged a glance with Eleanor. Neither spoke, both understood. Titan had found something again. The trail led through a grove of towering pines. The trees stood unusually close together. Their branches blocked most of the sunlight. The ground beneath them remained soft with decades of fallen needles. Then Titan stopped, completely. His ears rose, his body froze. Mason approached slowly. "What is it?" The dog stared ahead. Mason followed his gaze. At first he saw nothing. Then he noticed it, a weathered wooden cross, half hidden beneath vines, standing alone among the trees. Silence swallowed the valley. Even the wind seemed absent. The cross leaned slightly with age. Its wood had darkened from decades of rain and snow. No name appeared, no dates. Only a simple carving, a single military star. Eleanor covered her mouth. "Oh my God." Mason moved closer. The grave was old, very old, yet someone had cared for it. Small stones had been arranged around the base. Wildflowers grew nearby, not by accident. Deliberately planted. Someone had visited this place. Long ago. Titan approached the grave slowly, then sat beside it, quietly, respectfully. Mason felt a strange chill. Not fear, recognition, as if the dog somehow understood the importance of this place. He knelt near the cross. The soil around it appeared slightly uneven, not recently disturbed, but different. His instincts immediately noticed. Years of military training rarely disappeared completely. Something had been buried nearby. Eleanor pointed toward a patch of ground beneath the roots of a pine tree. There. Mason saw it too. A small section of metal protruded from the earth, rust-covered, nearly invisible. Together they carefully cleared away soil. The object slowly emerged, a military ammunition box, old, corroded, but intact. Mason's heartbeat accelerated. Another piece, another secret. The lid resisted, then opened. Inside rested several objects wrapped in oilcloth, protected from moisture, protected from time. The first bundle contained military papers. The second contained photographs. The third stopped Mason cold. A leather dog collar. Old, worn, weathered. The nameplate remained attached. One word. Valor. The forest seemed to disappear around him. Nathan's dog. The German shepherd from the photographs. The companion mentioned in the journals. Titan moved closer. The younger dog stared at the collar. Mason carefully lifted it. The leather felt fragile. The metal plate scratched and faded. Yet another engraving appeared on the inside. Words hidden from casual view. Mason turned it toward the light, then read aloud. He stayed beside me until the end. His voice barely rose above a whisper. Eleanor looked away. Emotion filled her eyes. Mason swallowed hard. The simple sentence carried enormous weight. Nathan, valor. Whatever happened here, they faced it together, just like Mason and Titan. Titan gently touched the collar with his nose, then sat beside Mason. The gesture felt strangely profound, as though one loyal dog was paying respect to another. The ammunition box contained one final item, a folded piece of paper. The handwriting belonged to Nathan. Mason opened it carefully. The first sentence immediately tightened his chest. "If you are reading this," then valor succeeded. The world seemed to stop. The forest, the mountains, the wind, everything faded. Only Nathan's words remained. "I did not betray my country. I died protecting someone who could expose the truth. Walter Hayes trusted me with her life." Mason stared at the page. Her life, not his, not Walter's. Someone else, someone important, a person Nathan believed worth sacrificing everything to protect. The mystery deepened instantly. Walter Hayes had disappeared. Nathan had been branded a traitor. Now another unknown person entered the story. Someone hidden, someone protected, someone connected to the conspiracy. Eleanor looked at him. "What does it mean?" Mason slowly folded the paper. His eyes remained fixed on the valley around them. The answer felt close now, closer than ever before. Nathan hadn't come here to hide evidence alone. He had hidden a person, a witness, someone powerful enough to threaten the entire conspiracy. And somewhere beyond the grave, beyond Valor's collar, beyond the mountains themselves, the final pieces of Nathan Reed's sacrifice were waiting to be discovered. The silent basin had given them one truth. Nathan Reed was never a traitor. He was a protector, and whatever secret he died protecting was still changing lives generations later. The journey back from the silent basin felt different. The mountains had not changed. The forests remained silent. The ridges still stretched endlessly beneath the afternoon sky. Yet everything seemed heavier now. Nathan Reed was no longer a mystery. He was becoming a man of flesh and blood, a soldier, a guardian, a man who had willingly sacrificed his reputation for something larger than himself. Mason drove slowly along the abandoned logging road. Titan rested in the passenger seat. The old collar belonging to Valor sat carefully wrapped inside Mason's backpack. Neither man nor dog seemed eager to leave the mountains behind. The basin had answers, but it had also created new questions. Walter Hayes, the hidden witness, the mysterious girl Nathan protected, and perhaps most importantly, who became of her? By the time they returned to the estate, evening shadows had already begun stretching across the fields. The farmhouse stood quietly atop the hill. Its windows reflected the golden light of sunset. For the first time since arriving, Mason felt something resembling belonging. The house no longer felt haunted. It felt patient, as if it had been waiting for someone to finally listen. Eleanor remained unusually quiet throughout dinner. They sat at the old kitchen table reviewing the contents of the ammunition box. Photographs, letters, maps, military documents. One photograph eventually caught her attention. She picked it up carefully. The image showed Nathan standing beside a teenage girl, perhaps 14 years old, dark hair, serious eyes, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The mountains visible behind them. The photograph had clearly been taken in the basin. Eleanor stared at the girl's face, longer than expected, then longer still. Mason noticed. "What is it?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she continued studying the picture. A strange expression appeared on her face. Confusion, disbelief, recognition. Finally, she looked up. "That's impossible." Mason frowned. "What is?" Eleanor swallowed, then pointed toward the girl's face. "She looks exactly like my grandmother." The room fell silent. Even Titan lifted his head. Mason stared at the photograph, then at Eleanor, then back again. At first, he dismissed the idea. Coincidences happened. Families shared features. Small towns often produced similar faces. But the longer he looked, the harder it became to ignore. The resemblance was undeniable. Same eyes, same jawline, same expression. Eleanor slowly sat down. "My grandmother had a picture." "What kind of picture?" "A photograph." Her voice sounded distant, like someone retrieving a memory from childhood. "She kept it hidden in a box." Mason leaned forward. "And?" Eleanor looked directly at him. She looked exactly like this girl. The silence deepened. Titan rose and crossed the room. He rested beside Eleanor's chair, as if sensing her discomfort. Mason felt his pulse quicken. A possibility was beginning to form. One neither of them wanted to speak aloud. "Not yet." Eleanor stood abruptly. "I need to check something." She grabbed her keys. "What?" "My grandmother's house." "Now?" "Now." The drive took 20 minutes. The Brooks family farmhouse sat several miles outside town. Small, weathered, comfortable. The kind of place built through generations of hard work. Eleanor's grandmother had passed away several years earlier. The house now belonged to Eleanor's mother, who used it mostly for storage. Fortunately, she still kept a key. The old building smelled of cedar and dust. Moonlight filtered through lace curtains. Family photographs lined the walls. 3 generations of Brooks women watched silently as Eleanor climbed the attic stairs. Mason and Titan followed. Boxes filled the attic, dozens of them. Labeled, organized, preserved. Eleanor moved directly toward one in the corner, as though she had known exactly where to look. Her hands trembled slightly. The box opened. Old letters, photographs, documents. Then finally a small wooden case. She opened it. Inside rested a photograph. Mason felt the breath leave his lungs. The same girl, older now, perhaps 18. but unmistakably the same person. Eleanor lowered herself onto a nearby chair. The color drained from her face. My grandmother. Mason sat beside her. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. The truth was unfolding on its own. Beneath the photograph rested a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon. Eleanor carefully untied them. The oldest letter was dated 1948, 3 years after the war. The signature at the bottom made Mason freeze. Nathan Reed. Oh my God. Eleanor's voice barely rose above a whisper. Mason opened the letter. The paper crackled softly. The handwriting matched the journal's perfectly. Dear Abigail, I pray this reaches you safely. You are old enough now to know why I could never remain in your life. Some men still search for answers that would place you in danger. Walter died protecting the truth. I promised him I would protect you. The room disappeared around Mason. Everything suddenly made sense. Walter Hayes, the hidden witness, the girl, Abigail, Walter's daughter. Nathan had hidden her, protected her, raised her in secret, then disappeared from history. Eleanor covered her mouth. Tears filled her eyes. My grandmother's name was Abigail. The words shattered the final barrier. Mason looked down at the letter, then at the photograph, then at Eleanor. The truth arrived with stunning force. Eleanor wasn't simply connected to the story. She existed because of it. Her grandmother had been the girl Nathan protected, the girl Walter Hayes died trying to save, the girl powerful people wanted erased. Titan rested his head gently against Eleanor's knee. The simple gesture finally broke her composure. Tears rolled down her cheeks, not tears of grief, tears of understanding, of gratitude, of revelation. For decades, her family had possessed fragments of a story without understanding its significance. Now the pieces fit together. Nathan Reed had saved her family. Without him, her grandmother would have disappeared. Without her grandmother, Eleanor would never have been born. The realization overwhelmed them both. Hours passed inside the attic. Letter after letter revealed more details. Nathan moved Abigail between safe locations, trusted friends, remote farms, mountain communities, always staying one step ahead of people searching for her. The letters described fear, sacrifice, constant movement, yet beneath it all remained unwavering determination. Nathan never abandoned the mission. Not once. Near midnight they discovered the final letter. Unlike the others, it remained sealed. The envelope bore a handwritten note for Abigail's descendants. Open when the truth is finally known. Eleanor stared at it. Her hands shook. Slowly she opened the envelope. Inside was a single page. The handwriting appeared less steady than before. Nathan had likely written it near the end of his life. If you are reading this, then the lies have finally begun to fail. Know this. Your grandfather, Walter Hayes, was a brave man. He tried to stop people who profited from the suffering of American soldiers. Those people silenced him. I could not save him, but I saved you. Never be ashamed of who you are. Never be afraid of the truth. And never forget that courage is sometimes nothing more than refusing to let evil rewrite history. The signature below appeared faded. Nathan Reed. The room remained silent for a long time. Finally, Eleanor folded the letter carefully. He gave up everything. Mason nodded. Everything. His reputation, his future, his family, his legacy, all sacrificed for a child he barely knew. Outside, wind moved gently through the trees. Inside, generations of mystery finally began aligning into a single story. Yet, as Mason studied the letters, another realization emerged. Someone else would understand what this discovery meant. Victor Hale. If Nathan's evidence connected directly to Walter Hayes's daughter, and if Eleanor's family descended from her, then the conspiracy wasn't merely historical. Living descendants remained. Living witnesses remained. Living proof remained. The truth no longer existed only in journals. It lived in bloodlines, families, people, and that made it dangerous. Very dangerous. Titan suddenly lifted his head. His ears focused toward the window. The dog stood, alert, watching the darkness outside. Mason immediately recognized the behavior. Something had changed. Someone was there. Far beyond the glass, near the edge of the property, a pair of headlights appeared briefly through the trees, then vanished, the same black SUV. Watching again, waiting again, and this time, whoever sat behind the wheel likely understood exactly what Mason and Eleanor had just discovered. A secret hidden for 80 years, a witness who survived, and a family that was never supposed to exist. The drive back to the Reed estate felt longer than usual. The mountains were dark now. Clouds covered the moon. The narrow roads wound through endless forests that seemed to close in around Mason's truck. Neither he nor Eleanor spoke much. The discovery of Abigail Hayes had changed everything. The mystery was no longer just about Nathan Reed. It was about real people, living people. Families whose lives existed because one man chose sacrifice over safety. Titan sat silently between them, watching the darkness beyond the windshield, always alert, always listening. When they finally reached the estate, the farmhouse appeared as a lonely silhouette against the mountain sky. Its windows glowed faintly from the lamps Mason had left on. For a moment, it felt almost welcoming, almost safe. But Mason had learned something during his years in combat. Danger rarely announces itself. The most dangerous moments often arrive disguised as ordinary ones. The next 3 days passed in a blur of work. Mason and Eleanor carefully organized the evidence. Nathan's journals, Walter Hayes's documents, the photographs, the letters, the map. Every piece strengthened the truth. Every piece weakened the lie. And every piece increased the danger. Sheriff Mercer visited once. Officially, he was checking on the vandalism involving Mason's truck. Unofficially, he wanted to know how much Mason had discovered. The older man stood on the porch watching the mountains. "You ever wonder why some stories survive?" he asked. Mason leaned against the railing. "Because they're true?" Mercer shook his head. "No." The sheriff looked toward the valley. "Because powerful people spend a lot of energy protecting them." The statement lingered. Neither man mentioned Victor Hale directly. Neither needed to. The message was clear: be careful. On the 4th morning, Eleanor arrived carrying a stack of county archives she had borrowed from the school district. Titan greeted her immediately. The German shepherd had become protective of her, almost family. Together they spent hours comparing names from Nathan's journals against historical property records. The connections became impossible to ignore. The Hale family appeared repeatedly. Businesses, land transfers, military contracts, financial records, always nearby, always benefiting, always present. By sunset, Mason felt mentally exhausted. The deeper he dug, the larger the conspiracy appeared. And yet one question still remained unanswered. Where were the final records? Nathan's journals mentioned additional evidence several times. Shipment manifests, signed statements, official correspondence. Enough documentation to expose everyone involved. But the documents themselves were missing. Somewhere. Titan suddenly lifted his head. The dog stared toward the hidden room, then toward the mountains, then back again. Mason frowned. "What is it?" Titan barked once, then walked toward Nathan's desk. The dog stopped beside one of the journals. His nose touched the page. Mason opened it. The entry immediately caught his attention. October 28, 1945. The final records remain secure at the warehouse. If discovered, the truth dies with them. Warehouse. Mason sat upright. Warehouse. Eleanor looked up. "What?" He pointed toward the journal. "The records." She moved closer. "Where?" Mason flipped through additional pages. Several entries referenced a warehouse near Black Creek, a former rail storage facility used during the war. Nathan had hidden evidence there before moving portions to the basin. Eleanor's eyes widened. "I know where that is." The old warehouse sat near the edge of town, abandoned, forgotten, barely standing. Most people ignored it. Mason looked at the journal. Then at Eleanor. The answer felt obvious. If the remaining records survived, They might finally possess proof powerful enough to expose everything. The decision took less than 10 seconds. They would go the next morning. Unfortunately, someone else reached the same conclusion. The warehouse stood beside abandoned railroad tracks, surrounded by weeds and rusting equipment. The structure itself looked ready to collapse. Broken windows, faded brick, sagging roof, nature slowly reclaiming it. The sky overhead had turned dark gray. A storm was approaching again. Mason parked near the entrance. Titan jumped out immediately. The dog seemed uneasy. His ears remained upright, his movements cautious. Mason noticed. So did Eleanor. "Something's wrong," Titan growled softly. The warehouse doors stood partially open, too open, as if someone had entered recently. Mason exchanged a glance with Eleanor, then moved inside. Dust filled the air. Sunlight filtered through broken windows. The massive interior stretched into darkness. Rows of shelves, stacks of old crates, abandoned machinery. Everything silent, everything still. Titan moved ahead, tracking, searching, following scents invisible to human senses. For nearly 20 minutes they explored. Nothing. Then Mason found it. A hidden office near the rear of the building. The door had been concealed behind collapsed shelving. Inside sat filing cabinets, military crates, and boxes covered in decades of dust. His heart began pounding. The records. They had found them. Eleanor opened the first box, then the second, then the third. Every one contained documents, names, contracts, shipment records, evidence, the missing pieces. Enough to prove Nathan had told the truth. Enough to expose the conspiracy completely. Mason smiled. For the first time, genuine hope surged through him. After generations of lies, they finally had proof. Then Titan barked, violently. Mason turned. The dog wasn't looking at the documents. He was staring upward, toward the roof. A strange sound echoed overhead. A crack, then another. Mason's instincts activated instantly. Something was wrong, very wrong. A sharp smell reached him. Smoke. Eleanor noticed it too. Mason. The storm outside suddenly darkened the room. Then came another sound. Not thunder. Fire. The rear section of the warehouse was burning. Flames spread rapidly along old wooden beams. Someone had been here recently, and someone had decided the warehouse needed to disappear. Move! Mason grabbed the boxes. Eleanor gathered the nearest files. Titan barked continuously. The fire expanded faster than expected. Smoke filled the air. Visibility dropped. The old structure groaned. Years of neglect and decay now combined with heat. A dangerous combination. They raced toward the exit. Halfway there, a crashing sound exploded above them. The roof shifted. Instinctively, Mason looked up and froze. For one terrible second, his mind wasn't in the warehouse. It was back overseas. A collapsed building, a failed operation. Dust, screaming, chaos. The PTSD episode hit like a wave, sudden, violent, paralyzing. His body stopped moving. The present disappeared. The past returned. Mason! Eleanor's voice sounded distant, far away. Another beam crashed nearby. The warehouse trembled. Still he couldn't move. The flashback held him captive. Then came a familiar bark. Titan, loud, urgent, desperate. The dog charged through smoke straight toward him. Titan slammed against his legs, then grabbed his sleeve, pulling, dragging, refusing to quit. Another section of roof collapsed. Heat rolled through the building. Eleanor screamed his name again. Titan barked directly into his face. The sound cut through the nightmare, through memory, through panic. Reality returned. Mason blinked. The warehouse reappeared. The fire, the smoke, the collapsing roof. Titan, still pulling him towards safety. The German shepherd's eyes never left his. Move. The message couldn't have been clearer. Mason grabbed the boxes, then followed. They sprinted toward the exit. Seconds later, the roof behind them collapsed completely. The explosion of dust and sparks shook the ground. Heat blasted across their backs. They burst through the doors and into the rain. The storm had finally arrived. Heavy rain hammered the earth. Steam rose from the burning structure. Mason collapsed onto one knee, breathing hard. Alive. Eleanor sat nearby, clutching the rescued files. Shaken, but safe. Titan limped toward them. Slowly, too slowly, Mason immediately saw it. The dog's fur was singed along one side. A burn marked his shoulder and flank. Not life-threatening, but serious. The result of charging back into danger to save him. Titan pressed against Mason's chest. Exhausted, still protecting, still loyal. Mason wrapped his arms around him. Emotion surged through him. Fear, relief, gratitude, guilt. The realization struck with brutal force. Without Titan, he would still be inside. Without Titan, the warehouse would have become his grave. Rain continued falling. The fire hissed beneath the storm. Eleanor slowly opened one surviving box. Inside rested dozens of documents. One file slid free, a list of names. At the top appeared a signature. Charles Hale. Mason stared at it, the founder of the Hale Empire. The man Nathan had been investigating. The proof finally existed. The truth had survived. But as Mason looked at Titan's injuries, another thought emerged. Someone had tried very hard to destroy that truth today, and next time they might not settle for burning documents. Next time, they might come directly for the people carrying them. Or the dog who had just saved a man's life for the second time. The war Nathan Reed started 80 years ago was no longer history. It was happening again. And now the people protecting the lie knew exactly how dangerous Mason Reed and Titan had become. The veterinary clinic sat on the edge of Black Creek beneath a row of maple trees already beginning to show hints of autumn. Rainwater still dripped from the branches outside. The storm had passed. The fire had burned itself out, but the consequences remained. Mason sat alone in the waiting room. His elbows rested on his knees, his hands clasped tightly together. The smell of disinfectant filled the air. A television mounted in the corner played silently. Nobody watched it. For the first time since arriving in North Carolina, Mason felt truly afraid. Not for himself, for Titan. The door to the treatment area remained closed. Every minute felt like an hour. Every second stretched endlessly. His mind replayed the warehouse over and over. The smoke, the collapsing roof, the moment he froze, the moment Titan charged back for him, the moment his dog chose loyalty over safety. Again, always again, the same loyalty that had carried them through years of struggle. Years of loneliness, years of homelessness. Mason stared at the floor. A heavy guilt settled over him. Titan had saved his life. But why had he needed saving? Because Mason froze. Because PD had stolen another moment from him. A moment that could have cost Titan everything. The clinic door finally opened. Dr. Linda Carter stepped into the waiting room. The older veterinarian removed her glasses and smiled gently. "He'll be okay." The words hit Mason like a wave. Relief nearly knocked the breath from his lungs. "You're sure?" She nodded. "The burns look worse than they are." Mason closed his eyes briefly. "Thank God. He'll need rest." The veterinarian handed him a folder. "Several weeks." Mason laughed softly. "Try telling him that." Dr. Carter smiled. "I already did." A few minutes later, Mason entered the recovery room. Titan lay on a padded bed. Bandages covered portions of his shoulder and side. The German shepherd looked tired, but alive. His tail immediately thumped against the floor. Mason knelt beside him. For several seconds, neither moved, neither needed words. The bond between them had long ago moved beyond language. Mason rested a hand gently against Titan's neck. "Thank you." Titan responded by placing one paw on his arm. The same gesture he always used. The same simple reassurance. "I'm still here." Outside the clinic, the mountains stood beneath clear skies. The storm had washed the world clean. Yet, Mason knew the difficult part was only beginning. The evidence recovered from the warehouse now filled several boxes stored inside the hidden room. Documents, contracts, military records, financial statements. Enough information to destroy reputations. Enough information to expose the truth. But not enough to guarantee victory. Something was still missing. One final piece, one final connection, one final proof That realization haunted him throughout the following week. Titan remained at the estate recovering. The dog hated inactivity. Every morning he attempted to patrol the property. Every morning Mason ordered him back to rest. Titan obeyed, reluctantly. Eleanor spent most evenings helping organize documents. The evidence painted a disturbing picture. Charles Hale and several associates had diverted medical supplies during the war. Walter Hayes discovered the operation. Nathan Reed joined him. Then Walter disappeared. Nathan was branded a traitor, and somehow the conspiracy survived. Yet one question remained unanswered. Where was Walter's testimony? Nathan referenced it repeatedly, a signed statement, detailed, specific, powerful enough to expose everyone involved. The testimony existed. Nathan had written about protecting it. Walter had risked his life creating it. Yet nobody had found it. One evening, while reviewing journals in the hidden room, Eleanor suddenly froze. Her finger remained pressed against a page. Mason. He looked up. What? Read this. The journal entry was short, only 3 lines, but every word mattered. The testimony remains beneath the spring. The bridge still stands. The water remembers. Mason stared at the page, then looked at Eleanor. The spring. She nodded slowly. The old stone spring. Memory surfaced instantly. Nathan's map, the mountains, the hidden locations. One place remained unexplored. A forgotten spring beneath an abandoned wooden bridge, several miles north of the estate. Titan immediately lifted his head, as if he already understood. The next morning they followed the map. Fog drifted across the valleys. Sunlight slowly climbed over the ridges. The road eventually ended near an old forest trail. From there they continued on foot. Titan walked beside them, still healing, still determined. The forest grew denser with every mile. Ancient trees blocked much of the sunlight. Moss covered fallen logs. Birdsong echoed through the mountains. The world felt untouched, timeless. Eventually, the sound of running water reached them. A creek, then a bridge. The structure appeared ancient, wooden, weathered, barely standing. The stream flowed beneath it toward a natural stone spring hidden among the rocks. Mason immediately understood why Nathan chose the location. Remote, easy to overlook, easy to remember. The spring bubbled continuously from beneath a limestone outcrop. Crystal clear water spilled into the creek. The water remembers, Eleanor whispered. Titan approached the spring. His nose moved across the stones, searching, tracking. Then he stopped, directly beside the spring. The dog began pawing at the ground. Mason smiled despite himself. Of course, Titan barked once, the same bark. The one that always meant he had found something. Together they cleared away loose rocks. Several minutes passed. Then Mason's shovel struck metal. A sharp, metallic sound echoed through the forest. His heartbeat accelerated. Carefully, they uncovered a cylindrical object. A waterproof military container. Sealed, protected, waiting 80 years. Mason slowly removed the lid. Inside rested several documents wrapped in oilcloth, perfectly preserved. The first page carried an official military heading. The second carried signatures. The third made Mason stop breathing. Walter Hayes. His signature appeared clearly at the bottom. The testimony. The real testimony. They had finally found it. Mason sat on a nearby rock and began reading. Walter described everything. The theft, the smuggling operation, the names involved, the methods, the financial records, every detail, every participant. No speculation, no rumor, only facts. The statement connected Charles Hale directly to the operation, connected his associates, connected the entire network, and included supporting evidence, dates, witnesses, locations, everything. Eleanor read over his shoulder. Neither spoke. The weight of the discovery filled the forest around them. This wasn't merely evidence. It was confirmation, proof, undeniable proof. The final piece Nathan died protecting. The final piece Walter died creating. The final piece Victor Hale feared. Titan sat quietly beside the spring. The German shepherd watched them calmly. His bandages moved gently with each breath. Mason looked at him, then at the testimony, then back at the mountains. For the first time since arriving at the estate, he felt something stronger than hope. Certainty. The truth was complete now. No missing links, no unanswered questions, no gaps. Walter's testimony connected everything. Nathan's sacrifice, Abigail's survival, the Hale family's rise, the lies, the cover-up, everything. Yet certainty brought a new realization. Once this became public, there would be no turning back. Victor Hale would know. The town would know. Everyone would know. A battle hidden for generations would finally move into the open. Eleanor seemed to reach the same conclusion. What happens now? Mason looked toward the mountains. The answer felt inevitable. We tell the truth. The words sounded simple, but both understood what they meant. A public fight, a confrontation, an ending or a beginning. Titan slowly stood. The dog walked toward Mason, then rested his head against his leg. The same gesture, the same promise. I'm with you, Mason smiled. The fear that had haunted him for years remained. The PTSD remained. The uncertainty remained. But something else existed now too. Purpose. The same purpose Nathan carried. The same purpose Walter died protecting. And as the water continued flowing from the spring beneath the old bridge, Mason realized the final chapter of the story had already begun. The testimony was found. The truth was complete. Now all that remained was convincing an entire town to face it. The church overlooking Black Creek had stood on the hillside for more than a century. Its white steeple rose above the valley like a watchtower. Generations had been baptized there, married there, mourned there, prayed there. And now, for the first time in decades, nearly the entire town was gathering beneath its roof. Word had spread quickly. Some called it a public presentation. Others called it a scandal. A few called it a reckoning. By sunset, every pew was filled. People lined the walls. Others stood outside beneath the maple trees. The atmosphere carried the nervous energy of a thunderstorm waiting to break. Mason stood alone in a small room behind the sanctuary. Boxes of evidence surrounded him. Nathan's journals, Walter's testimony, photographs, military records, the surviving warehouse documents. Everything neatly organized, everything ready, everything real. Yet his hands still trembled, not from fear of public speaking, not from fear of Victor Hale, not even from fear of failure. This was something deeper. For years, Mason had hidden from the world, sleeping in parking lots, avoiding conversations, avoiding memories, avoiding himself. Now he was about to stand before hundreds of people and tell a story that would change an entire town. A soft sound behind him broke his thoughts. Titan. The German shepherd stepped into the room. His burns had begun healing. The fur would never fully return in some places. Scars now crossed portions of his shoulder. But he carried himself with the same quiet dignity as always. Mason knelt. Titan immediately pressed against him. The familiar weight grounded him, steady, solid, present, the same way he had done countless times before. You ready? Titan's tail thumped once. Mason smiled. Me too. Outside, church bells rang. The meeting was beginning. The sanctuary fell quiet as Mason walked toward the front. Conversations faded. Whispers stopped. Every eye followed him. Some faces were supportive, some skeptical, some openly hostile. Victor Hale sat near the front, perfectly dressed, perfectly composed. His attorneys occupied the pew beside him. Several members of the town council sat nearby. Sheriff Mercer stood quietly along the wall, watching, waiting. Eleanor occupied the front row. Beside her sat her mother and several members of the Brooks family, the descendants of Abigail Hayes, the family Nathan had saved. Titan remained beside Mason. The German shepherd walked slowly but proudly. When they reached the front of the church, silence settled across the room. Mason looked around, then began. My name is Mason Reed. His voice echoed softly through the sanctuary. For most of my life, I believed my great-grandfather was a traitor. The audience remained silent. I grew up hearing the same story everyone else heard. He glanced toward Victor Hale, that Nathan Reed betrayed his country during World War II. A few heads nodded. The old story remained familiar, comfortable, accepted. But the story was a lie. Murmurs immediately spread through the crowd. Mason continued. 80 years ago, Nathan Reed uncovered a criminal operation stealing medical supplies meant for wounded American soldiers. The room grew quieter. He wasn't a traitor. He was trying to stop one. Mason began presenting evidence. Photographs appeared on a projection screen. Military records, letters, maps, journal entries. Each document carefully explained. Each fact supported. Each claim documented. The audience listened, at first with skepticism, then curiosity, then concern. The emotional shift became visible. People leaned forward, whispered less, focused more. Nathan Reed slowly transformed before their eyes. No longer the villain they remembered. A soldier, a protector, a whistleblower, a man destroyed for telling the truth. Then Mason introduced Walter Hayes. The church became even quieter. Walter's testimony appeared on screen. His signature, his statements, his evidence. The room absorbed every word. Victor Hale's expression remained controlled, but Mason noticed the tension in his jaw, the slight tightening around his eyes. The confidence was beginning to crack. Then came the moment nobody expected. Mason turned toward Eleanor. Eleanor Brooks. She stood slowly. The room watched, confused, curious. Mason projected the photograph of Abigail Hayes, then another photograph, and another. The resemblance became obvious immediately. Gasps spread through the sanctuary. Eleanor's grandmother was Abigail Hayes. The room erupted into whispers. She was the child Nathan Reed protected. Now the audience understood. This wasn't ancient history. This wasn't mythology. This wasn't rumor. Living descendants remained. Living evidence remained. Living proof remained. Eleanor stepped forward. Her voice trembled slightly. My family exists because Nathan Reed chose courage over safety. Silence followed. Powerful silence. The kind that changes people. Victor Hale finally stood. His voice carried confidently. These are stories. The room turned toward him. Interesting stories. He smiled. But stories aren't proof. The tension returned instantly. Mason had expected this. Victor pointed toward him. You're asking this community to trust a homeless veteran suffering from severe PT. Several people shifted uncomfortably. Victor continued. A man who recently accused respected families of crimes committed before most of us were born. His attorneys nodded. The attack was deliberate, calculated. Paint Mason as unstable. Discredit the messenger. Ignore the message, the old strategy. And for a moment it worked. Doubt spread. Questions emerged. The crowd became uncertain again. Mason felt the shift immediately. Years earlier, such a moment might have broken him. The shame, the memories, the judgment. But before he could respond, a sound echoed through the church. A soft clicking sound. Claws against wood. Every head turned. Titan. The German shepherd slowly walked down the center aisle. Something hung from his neck. A leather strap. An old collar. The crowd watched silently. Titan reached Mason, then sat beside him. The collar rested clearly against his chest. Valor's collar. Nathan Reed's wartime dog. The dog tag attached to it glinted beneath the church lights. Mason gently lifted it. Victor is right about one thing. The room listened. I'm not perfect. He looked toward the crowd. I struggle with PTSD. No shame, no hesitation, no apology. Some days are harder than others. Titan remained beside him, steady, faithful. But Steve doesn't erase facts. He held up Walter's testimony. Trauma doesn't change signatures. Another document, or military records. Another, or financial ledgers. The audience watched, listening carefully now. Victor's confidence began fading. Mason stepped forward. The truth doesn't care whether it's convenient. He turned toward the screen. One final image appeared. A collection of evidence. Walter's testimony, Nathan's journals, the warehouse records, the military documents, everything connected. everything verified, everything undeniable. The church became completely silent, no whispers, no arguments, no distractions, only truth. Sheriff Mercer finally stepped forward. His voice carried clearly, "I've reviewed the evidence." The audience focused on him. "The documentation is authentic." A wave moved through the crowd. "Not noise, shock," Mercer continued. "The historical record of this town will be officially corrected." Victor Hale's face lost all color. The words landed like a hammer. Corrected. The lie was over. The audience began understanding the full implication. Their town founder, their local hero, their celebrated family legacy, built upon corruption, built upon theft, built upon betrayal. And Nathan Reed, the disgraced man, the forgotten man, the man everyone mocked, had been telling the truth all along. Mason looked around the sanctuary. Faces reflected every emotion imaginable: shock, sadness, anger, relief, understanding. One elderly man slowly stood, then another, then another. People began applauding, not loudly at first, just a few, then more, then dozens, then nearly the entire church. The applause filled the sanctuary, not for Mason, not for Eleanor, not even for Titan, for Nathan, for Walter, for the truth. Victor Hale quietly gathered his belongings. No speech, no argument, no defense. For the first time in his life, influence could not save him. Facts had won. As Victor moved toward the exit, Mason watched him go. The battle was over. The truth had survived. And somewhere beyond the church windows, high above the valley, the Blue Ridge Mountains stood silent beneath the evening sky. The same mountains that had watched Nathan Reed sacrifice everything. The same mountains that had hidden secrets for 80 years. The same mountains that had finally given them back. Beside Mason, Titan rested quietly. The German shepherd's scarred shoulder caught the fading sunlight, a reminder, a survivor, a hero. And as the applause continued rolling through the old church, Mason realized something he had not felt in years. The weight he carried was finally beginning to lift. The town had heard the truth. The lie was broken. And for the first time in generations, the Reed name stood in the light instead of the shadows. 6 months later, spring returned to the Blue Ridge Mountains. The hills surrounding Black Creek glowed with new life. Dogwoods bloomed along winding roads. Wildflowers spread across open fields. The forests that had hidden secrets for decades now stood bright beneath clear skies. Everything felt different. Not because the mountains had changed, but because the people living among them had. The Reed estate no longer looked abandoned. Fresh white paint covered the farmhouse. New windows reflected the morning sun. The old barn stood restored. Walking paths wound through the fields. American flags moved gently in the mountain breeze. Laughter replaced silence. Life replaced decay, and hope replaced shame. A wooden sign stood near the entrance. Reed Retreat for Veterans and Service Dogs. Below it appeared a smaller inscription, in honor of Nathan Reed and all who sacrificed for the truth. Mason stood on the front porch, holding a cup of coffee. The sunrise painted the valley gold. For a long moment he simply watched. Veterans crossed the property below. Some trained service dogs. Others worked in the gardens. A few sat quietly on benches overlooking the mountains. Healing looked different for everyone. Mason understood that now. Some wounds faded, others remained forever. But healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about learning how to carry the weight. And finally, after years of drifting through life, he had found a place where people understood that. A familiar sound interrupted his thoughts. Titan. The German shepherd emerged from the farmhouse carrying a tennis ball. The scars from the warehouse fire remained visible beneath his fur. Permanent reminders of what he had survived. Yet the dog moved confidently, proudly. The veterans loved him. The visitors loved him. Even the children who toured the property knew his story. Titan had become something larger than a dog. He had become a symbol, proof that loyalty could survive anything. Mason crouched. Titan immediately dropped the ball into his lap. You never stop working, do you? Titan's tail wagged. Apparently not. A truck pulled into the driveway. Eleanor stepped out carrying several archival boxes. She smiled when she saw them. Morning. Morning. The past 6 months had changed her life too. The discovery of Abigail's connection to Nathan had inspired her to preserve the estate's history. What began as a schoolteacher helping a stranger had become something much more meaningful. Together, they had transformed the hidden room into a historical archive. Students visited regularly. Researchers traveled from across the state. Families came seeking forgotten stories. The truth that once hid in darkness now lived openly, exactly as Nathan would have wanted. Eleanor climbed the porch steps. New donation arrived. Mason raised an eyebrow. Another one? 3 boxes, she laughed. Turns out a lot of people suddenly remember old family documents once they realize history matters. They carried the boxes inside. The former hidden room looked completely different now. The secret door remained, but no longer concealed anything. Sunlight streamed through newly installed windows. Display cases lined the walls. Nathan's journals occupied a place of honor. Walter Hayes's testimony rested beside them. Photographs, maps, letters, every piece carefully preserved, every piece finally visible. The room no longer protected secrets. It protected truth. Mason opened the newest box. Most contents appeared ordinary. Old letters, photographs, newspaper clippings. Then he noticed something unusual. A small wooden panel, weathered, dust-covered. It looked familiar, too familiar. Where did this come from? Eleanor checked the inventory note. Maintenance crew found it during restoration. Mason turned the panel over. His pulse quickened. The wood matched Nathan's desk. Exactly. One corner contained the same craftsmanship, the same grain, the same age. A hidden section. Carefully detached years earlier. Mason carried it to the desk. The fit proved perfect. A missing compartment, hidden beneath the center drawer, somehow overlooked during every previous search, including his own. For several seconds he simply stared, then carefully pressed the panel into place. A soft click echoed through the room. A concealed drawer slid open. Both froze. Inside rested a single object. Nothing more, nothing less. A folded piece of paper. Mason unfolded it slowly. The handwriting immediately stopped his breath. Nathan read, the final message, the final secret, the final gift. He began reading aloud. If a reed returns with a faithful dog, trust the dog. Silence filled the room. Even Titan stopped moving, Mason continued. He will finish what I could not. The words hit him harder than anything he had discovered over the previous months. Not because they solved another mystery. Not because they revealed another conspiracy, because they revealed something else entirely. Faith. Nathan had believed someone would come. Someday, somewhere, a reed would return, and a dog would help uncover the truth. The message continued. Dogs see what men overlook. They remain loyal when others leave. They listen when pride refuses, and they guide us home when we lose our way. If you are reading this, then the truth survived. And if the truth survived, then so did hope. Mason lowered the paper. His eyes remained fixed on the words. Emotion tightened his throat. Across the room, Titan watched quietly. The same dog who had found the hidden wall. The dog who discovered the dog tag. The dog who tracked the valley. The dog who located the spring. The dog who saved his life. Twice. The dog who had carried him through homelessness, through peace, through loneliness, through grief. The dog who refused to quit, just as Nathan predicted. For several moments nobody spoke. Then Eleanor smiled softly. I think Nathan would have liked him. Mason laughed, a quiet laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere deep. I think so too. Outside, voices drifted through the open window. Children. A school tour had arrived. Dozens of students crossed the property. Some pointed toward the farmhouse. Others waved at Titan. The German shepherd immediately stood, ready for duty, ready to greet visitors, ready to do what he always did. Serve. Mason followed them outside. The children gathered near the front lawn. Excitement filled the air. One little boy pointed toward Titan. "That's him," the teacher smiled. "That's Titan." The boy looked at Mason. "Is it true?" "What?" "That he found everything." Mason glanced at Titan. The German shepherd sat proudly beside him. Scars visible, eyes bright, tail moving slowly. The hero of a story he never understood. Mason smiled. He found the things that mattered. The boy nodded thoughtfully, as if that answer somehow made perfect sense. The tour continued. Children explored the archive. Veterans trained service dogs in the fields. Families walked the trails. Life filled every corner of the estate, and throughout it all, Titan remained at the center. Not seeking attention, not seeking praise, simply doing what loyal dogs have always done, showing up, staying close, helping people find their way. Late that afternoon, Mason returned alone to the hill overlooking the valley. The mountains stretched endlessly before him. Blue, peaceful, timeless. The same mountains that had watched Nathan's sacrifice. The same mountains that had hidden Walter's testimony. The same mountains that had guarded secrets for generations. Now they watched something else. Healing Mason sat beneath an old oak tree. Titan settled beside him. Together they watched the sun begin its slow descent. The silence felt comfortable. Not empty, not lonely, comfortable. For years, Mason believed he had lost everything: his career, his purpose, his future, his home. But sitting there beside Titan, he finally understood the truth. Sometimes life doesn't return what was lost. Sometimes it gives something better. A second chance, a new purpose, a reason to keep moving forward. The valley below glowed beneath the evening light. Laughter echoed faintly from the retreat. Dogs barked in the distance. Children played near the barn. Veterans shared stories on the porch. Life, simple, beautiful life. Mason rested one hand on Titan's shoulder. The German shepherd leaned gently against him. And for the first time in many years, the nightmares felt quieter. The guilt felt lighter. The future felt possible. Peace had not arrived all at once. It never does. Peace arrived one step at a time, one truth at a time, one act of loyalty at a time, one faithful dog at a time. And as the sun disappeared behind the Blue Ridge Mountains, Mason Reed finally felt something he thought he had lost forever. He felt home. The end. If you believe loyalty and truth still matter, type yes in the comments. And if a dog has ever changed your life, drop a 1 below. We'd love to hear your story. Sometimes justice takes years to arrive, but it's always worth standing for. And if you enjoy stories about courage, perseverance, and second chances in the land we love, be sure to subscribe and join us for the next journey.